Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this, the second in our series of webinars focusing specifically on our YaraVita foliar nutrition products. My name's Heather Barrett. I am the Marketing Operations Manager for Yara UK and Ireland, and this evening I'm joined by Phil Burrell, YaraVita Product Manager. So the plan for this evening, Phil's going to explain to us how to optimise arable crop yield with YaraVita foliar nutrition. He's got lots of advice, lots of data to share with us. We'll then end the session with a bit of a Q&A. Thank you to those of you who have already submitted your questions. If anyone else would like to do so this evening, while Phil's going through his presentation, you'll be able to use the questions section, which is in the menu, which you should be able to see on your screen right now. Mine's off to the right-hand side. I'm supposing yours is there as well. So, Phil, over to you.
Thanks, Heather. Right, here we go with the technology. Now that should all hopefully be showing on everybody's screen. So as Heather said, this is sort of part of a series we're doing focusing on the YaraVita range. So we had the first webinar, it's probably two and a half weeks ago now, where we looked at the way we formulate the products, the way we manufacture the products and such like. We're now going to look at how we utilize the products, particularly focused on arable combinable crops, so cereals and oilseed rape. We will be having another webinar later in the spring focused on non-combinable crops, so i.e. sugar beet, maize, potatoes. The date for that has not been set, but the plan is to do that later on as we go through the spring. So tonight, what I want to do is look at practical ways we can optimize yield. So firstly, talk quickly about sort of foliar nutrition strategies, how we should be looking at nutrition and what our view as Yara is on foliar nutrition, and then look at some specific crops. So a little bit of time looking at oilseed rape, and then we'll focus on cereals because cereals is the one that we can have obviously the biggest impact now with foliar nutrition as we go through the spring growth periods. The first thing I would say is we are obviously very focused on foliar nutrition, and nutrition in general. Yield, we know, is limited by whatever is the least available factor. Now that may be sunlight. As much as I would love to be able to control the sun. I can't. We all know the sun plays a massive impact in terms of crop yield. All we can do is optimize our nutrition to make sure that crop can utilize that sun the best it can. Conversely, it might be that we've got too much water. If we've got too much water because the drainage of the fields is not functioning right, I'm sorry, but I can't help you with that one. Again, that's back to basics and the basic principles of farming. And likewise, it may be that rooting is severely compromised because of compaction. Again, sorry guys, I haven't got a silver bullet for that. I cannot help. That comes back to fundamental basics of farming. And everything we do, we need to think about that. Because for me, the one thing that foliar nutrition will not do is solve basic errors in growing crops. And I always like to go back to basics, and people get really bored of me talking about things like pH. I don't, because I know it is so critical for you as farmers and agronomists. If you've not got optimum pH, there's a reason why we recommend optimum pH around 6.5 for arable soils. Funnily enough, because that's the range where the majority of nutrients are most available. Yes, molybdenum, slightly the opposite. It's more at higher pH. But if we're not optimizing our pH, and we've got a pH of 5.5 to 6, any phosphorus we put on that soil, we're going to lose potentially half of it straight away to lockup. And it is an area that has been neglected, because if you look at the analytical data that comes in through the lab at Pocklington, and then when we put that to all the other lab data from around the country, we are seeing a decline in soil pH. That needs to stop. We need to get back to basics. And as I always say, spend £20 online, you could unlock yourself £200 worth of nutrients. And yes, we don't sell lime, funnily enough, but it is critical. And again, it's back to basic stuff. You know, come to us for the advice how we then optimize our yield, but you've got to get the basics right. I love pictures. There'll be a lot of pictures in this presentation. And this was a picture that a colleague shared with me in the summer drought. And you can see on this grass field, there's distinct lines. What is it? Well, for any amateur sports people out there, it's lime marker paint. Lime marker paint has clearly had a liming effect. And funnily enough, we get more grass growth. I would say that's amazing. If we could bottle that up and sell it, we wouldn't need to do webinars. My job would be very easy. But there's a product out there that can help you do that, and that's lime. You know, utilize it, get those pH levels correct. So you're optimizing what nutrition you have already in the soil. You're unlocking that bank and allowing that cash to come out, and then we optimize. The one thing I think has been really great as an industry is we've moved away from this managing deficiency. In the past, when we look at how we utilize things like tissue testing, we saw a problem in a field, as you can see. We then take some samples, we get a report, and it tells us we've got some deficiency. Brilliant. We can do something about it. However, in that scenario, the yield is already compromised. Is that the way we should be managing our crops? I don't believe it is. And actually, I believe as an industry, we're moving so much more towards proactive nutrition. If we look at the tissue analysis that's coming into the lab at Pocklington, which is growing year on year on year, so much more of that now is proactive analysis done at periods when the crop is likely to have a nutritional demand, to see what's happening in the field, and then we can attempt to correct that. The one thing I would say is if you do tissue analysis, do something about it. Otherwise, there really is no point in doing it in the first place. And I'll pick out boron on wheat being a prime one. We see 80% of samples are deficient, but then nobody does anything about it. So if you are going to take the time to do a tissue test, then the message is do something about it. It's really frustrating for me when I pick up literature that still says at the first sign of deficiency, apply X, Y, or Z. Very scientific, very, the book says. The real world to me says that's all well and good. However, if we then get 2 weeks or 3 weeks where we can't get on with a crop sprayer, you've got a serious problem. So, you know, very much move to this proactive nutrition, because ultimately, again, with anything, whether it's nutrition, whether it's fungicides, whether it's herbicides, prevention is generally cheaper than cure. And I don't, you know, open to be challenged, but I'm sure most people would agree with me in that scenario. Again, I love pictures. This picture served a great purpose. This picture shows what happens when you don't get your macronutrients right. So with those 2 rows of potatoes, they didn't get their N, P, K, sulfur at planting. So realistically, with those 2 rows of potatoes, does it really matter if those 2 rows are short in zinc or copper? Probably not, because we haven't got the basic nutrition right to start with. And again, we know there is a lot of foliar nutrition sold out there in the market to solve all the problems of not getting the basic stuff right. Get that pH right, get that base fertilizer right, then look at foliar nutrition to optimize yield. Because you can clearly see, you know, whatever we do to those 2 rows of potatoes, I'm going to have a real job bringing it back to the 2 rows next door to it. So get that basic nutrition right in the seed bed, and then look for foliar nutrition, because those 2 rows that we can see there are very much in this deficiency with visual symptoms. And the biggest problem we have with nutrition in general is it's bloody hard to see. If I don't put nitrogen on a crop, I can see it. If I don't put sulfur on grass or cereals, I can see it. But if I don't put zinc on or copper on, I can't see it. And that's a big challenge we have, because often people will say, well, I didn't spray the last 100 yards of the crop and I didn't see any difference. you know what? If you could see a difference, I'd be amazed. The key in anything we do is ensuring that you get back more money in extra yield than what you've paid for that input. That's ultimately what we should be doing. And what we're attempting to do with optimizing is getting this area here where we can have a yield loss where we can't see it. So we're ensuring we've got adequate nutrition in the plant to ensure it's optimizing the macro fertilizer we do put on the soil. You know, if we want to improve nitrogen use efficiency, we need to ensure there is no nutrients lacking. We need to ensure we've got a good root system, and that's where foliar nutrition can come in. I'm not from a livestock background. You know, for me, one of those things that's got 4 legs, the best place for it is probably on a plate. I like tractors because with a tractor you can put it into park and it generally stays there. Cows like to run around, but I think when you look at livestock, there's a lot we can actually take from the livestock sector into the crop sector, and that will be things like health. You know, a livestock farmer does not wait until that cow is severely suffering because it's not been fed the right nutrients before they do something about it, because then they get a big vet bill. Us as human beings, if we keep ourselves healthy and eat the right foods, the right vitamins, etc., we generally get less ill. That's a fact. Now, I'm not sitting here and I'm never going to say to you, use foliar nutrition and forget about fungicides. There's other people that want to do that. I say crack on. I'm in the east, and good luck trying to control yellow rust out here on the Lincolnshire coast without fungicides. Good luck if you're in the southwest or Ireland controlling septoria. What we do know is if you have a healthy soil and then we have a healthy plant, it will naturally build defenses against disease pathogens. We know that. So for me, fungicides and nutrition should be working hand in hand. One does not replace the other, for sure. If people want to sell nutrition on that basis, that's up to them. It's not something we do as Yara. We will promote managing that crop proactively to naturally fight off disease. So everything we do should be about optimization, but I'll stress it and I'll stress it again at the end, and I keep stressing it every single webinar, every single event, every single briefing we do. Get those basics right first, because if you don't, you're on a hiding to nothing. If you don't want to get this right, then let's draw stumps and let's call it close of play. Get it right, optimize. I'm not going to talk about the macronutrients tonight because we've had previous webinars that's covered nitrogen and sulfur. I'm going to look more towards the sort of macronutrients and what we can do with foliar nutrition. Partly because obviously this webinar is focused on YaraVita and foliar nutrition, but partly because some of those early decisions on nitrogen and sulfur should have already been made and should already be on the crop. And as I've seen today, walking some oilseed rape, those nitrogen applications made 2 or 3 weeks ago, the crop's already responded, which is great. So now we can start to think about foliar nutrition. When we think of other nutrients for the oilseed rape crop, boron is a standout one. You know, it's quite commonplace to apply boron. Manganese is probably one of the few micronutrients that's routinely applied, purely because those who are on manganese deficient land, you know, if you don't apply manganese, you don't have a crop. It's quite simple. It is one of the few micronutrients you can actually see. And we see that when it comes through to tissue analysis within the lab. We don't see a huge amount of manganese deficiency, both in cereals and in oilseed rape, because it's one of those nutrients people understand. We do see a lot of deficiency of the other nutrients, and they all have important roles to play within the crop. You know, if we take boron and calcium, for example, really important in ensuring we've got a healthy plant structure. And we always see that classic boron deficiency as the crop races through stem extension, and we see that rapid growth. Sometimes it's not boron that's causing that. You know, I'm not saying just keep loading the plant up with boron. There is times when that crop doesn't grow. We've all seen it with oilseed rape. Vroom, it goes, and you get split stems. But it can also be a sign of boron deficiency. As I said, calcium quite important, but other nutrients as well. I mean, you take something like magnesium. Magnesium, both in oilseed rape and cereals, is probably the one I get the most questions around, particularly relating to soil indexes. People on heavy clay soils where we've got K indexes of 3+, we've got mag indexes of 5 and 6. That's what we've got where I am out on the heavy marshland in Lincolnshire. And I often get asked, will we get a response from putting magnesium on those soils? Generally, you will. Why is it that magnesium shows first on the oldest leaves? Because when moisture is restricted, it's the first nutrient that shuts down. And we take a crop like oilseed rape. Peak magnesium demand for oilseed rape is just prior to flowering. Well, by then you hope the crop's 5, maybe 6 foot tall. Depends on your growth regulatory strategy, your seed rate, and your early nitrogen applications. But that's a long way for that plant to draw magnesium from the soil all the way up to support that green canopy and green pods, particularly when it goes dry. It's a real challenge. And then you look at other things like molybdenum. Classic symptoms are that whiptailing we get, where we get a folded leaf. And again, if we've got a folded leaf, what is the leaf ultimately? It's a solar panel. So we want a nice flat, large leaf area. If that leaf's all twisted, it's not going to be functioning as well and photosynthesizing. So key roles to play. And again, manganese, it can be very important in terms of oil content and driving oil content forward. So again, another nutrient that's quite important for oilseed rape crop as we get later on. Early, obviously, it's all about making sure we've got a canopy structure to start with. So all key nutrients and all have a role to play. And this just summarizes what really we've spoke about. You know, each area has an important impact. So boron and calcium, stem cell strength, healthy plant. Boron, also very important in terms of flowering, for even flowering, which means more pods, more seeds per pod. Manganese we've spoke about, and manganese early for chlorophyll, and nitrogen too. These are just some examples that I've pulled off the archive of what you can see when you have deficiency. Again, you know, my overall message is when you're seeing this, it is too late. You know, you take that one here. This leaf is not going to be photosynthesizing as well as that one. It's just not possible because it's yellow. There's the classic boron symptoms, manganese early and molybdenum over this right hand side. So, you know, by the time we see that, it's too late. You know, I always like to do this was all of us in a room, and I know with my colleague John Telfer we always do it. We put the pictures up and get people to guess what they are. And the best answer people tell me is like a weed ident. Well, I don't see these things because I do my job properly, which is fantastic. That's what I like to hear. However, we do see from the tissue analysis that comes in the lab, and this is not a small data set. This is around 6,000 samples over the last 6 years for oilseed rape. And you can see there that, you know, the magnesium, 80% of crops deficient. Boron, even though it's routinely applied, 60%. Molybdenum, you know, up here towards 60%. But look at manganese, it's down here because we understand it. Question I often get asked again here is, well, surely this is just confirming where somebody has got an issue. I'll go back to what I said at the start. If I put this tissue analysis up from 2007 to 2012, so 10, 15 years ago, yeah, I would tend to agree that 10 to 15 years ago, the majority of people were tissue testing when they saw they've got a problem. In this day and age, I think so much more of this is actually proactive tissue testing to see what's going on in the crop. And a question again with boron I often get asked is, should we put higher doses on? It's quite immobile in the plant, so actually you probably shouldn't. You should just put it on more frequently. And we see that in our trials with things like Brasitrel Pro. There's a distinct rate advantage between just a spring application and an autumn and spring. That autumn followed by spring is the one that delivers the most yield, because you're loading that crop up in the autumn, so there is nothing deficient as it starts to grow away in the spring, and then you come back with that spring application. So we see it. The Yen project, whether you're a fan of Yen or not, the one thing it does do is give you some good learnings. We're a sponsor, and we get involved in tissue testing. The one thing that my colleagues at Pocklington have been able to do at the lab is then plot the tissue test results versus the final yields. And this is just the top 5 in the, I don't know what you call it, peachy coloured, orangey, faded orange colour. And then the bottom 5 yielding Yen crops. And what this is the boron concentration in the leaf up here versus along the bottom the day of the year, not the day of the growing crop. So let's roughly say 30 days in a month, end of Feb, March, April, May. And you can see there is a distinct advantage to those high yielding crops. More nutrient content in the leaf during that spring growing period. And it's the same for other nutrients as well. You know, magnesium is pretty linear, especially when we get late towards the end of the season. You can, sorry, my screen has just gone. Hang on, I have now got, that's better. Got a copy of myself on the screen. I don't want to see myself. You can see the magnesium here. It's pretty linear, particularly towards the end. If we think that's sort of towards the end of May, distinct advantage for keeping that crop green. Molybdenum, again, an advantage. Nitrogen, not as great as you might think, but there is still an advantage from keeping that crop green and keeping it photosynthesizing. Why do we put fungicides on late? To keep it green. Why have certain fungicides over the years, strobilurins, Amistar, as a brilliant fungicide for keeping it green. Things like Aviator have now got it on their labels as well for that greening. Keep that crop green, keep it photosynthesizing, generally equals high yield. We also, now I've completely frozen my screen. I think we also see that in trials. So these are our own trials looking at straight boron here versus, say, 3 litres of Brasitrel Pro. So we've got less boron in this multi-nutrient product, but we've got those other nutrients, and those other nutrient interactions are clearly what's driving a yield response. And we see it, and that's Brasitrel Pro at 2 litres in the spring, 3 litres in the spring, and then 3 litres twice. And that's a 6-year data set where we had 2 trial sites a year, fully replicated. So again, backing up that initial thought of don't just think about the one nutrient. When it comes to spring applied Brasitrel, 3 litres is the rate we recommend. I think that the product label will say up to 4, but financially 3 litres is where you want to be, and that's the one that delivers the biggest margin over input cost, as you can see there. So around 20 odd pound a hectare more than using a straight boron product. So backs up that key message of getting all the nutrients together. The reason why we focus on crop specific products, so the likes of Brasitrel Pro, Gramitrel, there's other ones, it's for simplicity and convenience. You know, we want farmers to have products that work, that are convenient. One can, so when we come to complex tank mixes, we're not having to mix multiple different products in, and we have everything in one can ready to use. And the reason why they've all got different nutrients is because the research has been done to say that those crops need these nutrients. We don't just slap loads of things in a can because we can. We do it to make them crop specific. And that's how the Fosin business prior to YaraVita days was driven. You know, look at the data, what do the crops need? Let's look at some tissue results and let's make something. And yeah, simplicity is the key, convenience is the key. If you want to go out and tissue test and treat accordingly, absolutely fine. We have no issue with that. We have individual products that you can tank mix. But we are seeing more and more growth in these crop specific products because of the simplicity and that tank mixability. One product Braccitrel Pro instead of 5 individual products. I often get asked, when is the ideal timing? So pre-AstroCurve, it would all be going on around this timing. So what's tomorrow? No, 1st of March is Wednesday. Then the likes of clopyralid type products. So going back years ago, Galera, Shield, they would be going on prior to stem extension. That's when the products would have been applied. With AstroCurve coming along, what we've seen is a move to slightly later. And we often find that the Braccitrel Pro ends up going in with the growth regulatory type fungicides around that stem extension. Yeah, for me, if you've not put any nutrition on yet and you've got the opportunity, I would get out there now. With the cost of growing crops currently, if you've got that opportunity now, we've got some fresh growth, I would get out there. Once we get to this stage, one, we're too late, because if we're trying to sort out nutritional issues here, the horse is up the road. It's too late to shut the stable door. And also we're hitting petals, and we need to be in green leaf, really. All these things are going to wind up on the floor. So when we get to this stage, I think, for Braccitrel Pro, it's too late. You need to be on here. A picture I actually took today in the field, this crop received its first nitrogen application 3 weeks ago on the 3rd of Feb, 4th of Feb, something like that. It certainly responded, because prior to that, there was all this dieback of frosted leaf. And my advice at the time, we did a video on social media, was to get some nitrogen on, get the crops growing. Once we've got active new growth, which we now have, now is the time to get out there with that application. If you want to wait until stem extension and mix it in with the tebuconazoles, metconazoles, etc., absolutely fine. We know the product is widely tank mixable. I always advise people to check our tank mix service. It's free, so please check that. But the time is now. The other thing I would say is, actually, these products don't cost a fortune, and it's a relatively small investment. You're looking at anywhere sort of 15 to 20 pound a hectare for this application, which in the grand scheme of growing a crop this year, is a very, very small investment when we consider it may be anywhere between 300 and 500 pound a hectare on nitrogen. Some serious amounts already spent on herbicides, particularly if you're in a blackgrass area. But we've seen from that trials, that's the long-term yield response, 0.27 tons a hectare. Margin over input cost £100, a return of investment 7 to 1. I would say that's pretty good. And the other way I always like to look at it is, how much yield do I need to pay for it? And it's anywhere between 30 and 40 kilograms per hectare. Yield response will cover that cost. It's immeasurable. We all spill. I drive a combine. We all spill more than that. More than that trickles out every time the auger comes in. But that's what I say. If you're gonna do anything, try it on your own farm and then put it over the weighbridge. But it is such a small amount that will pay for that investment. So that's the core message on oilseed rape. Finally, on oilseed rape, the other thing to think about is maintaining that green leaf area. And we do this with the use of nitrogen late. So whether you're using, our new fall type products, or we have other foliar nitrogen products in terms of Safen or crop lift, my advice with these products to get the best out of them is you want to be hitting these bad boys here. We need to be hitting pod. We don't want to be coating petals with these products and then the petals dropping on the floor. So for me, you want to be towards that end of flowering, so 30% in flowering and less. That's when you want to be looking at putting these nitrogen products on, because again, if you go at mid-flower, 50% flowering, an awful lot of that spray interception is going to hit those petals. And that's why we do a mid-flower spray, isn't it, with sclerotinia. We go early to protect the stems at the yellow bud first flower. And then the second application is trying to protect the petals, which then drop onto the stems or onto the floor. So for me, aim towards the end of flowering to keep that green leaf going. That's oilseed rape. When we come on to cereals, then we know yield is driven by 3 things. There's 3 pillars for driving yield: the number of ears per square metre, the number of grains per ear, and the size of the grain. And we can have an impact with all of those with nutrition, but at different times of the crop. If you look in the AHDB Wheat growth guide, it gives you the benchmarks for 11-ton crop, and you can see them on the screen. Yes, I get it. Sunshine is the key. We know that, and the last 2 years have proven that so much, because if we look at the crop in 2021, I believe, certainly around here, it looked like we were going to have a record-breaking harvest. We then didn't have any sunshine for 6 weeks during grain fill. Move forward to last year, 2022. I was sat on a sprayer at T2, and you look down and it was all I can see is soil. Then what happened? We had fantastic sunlight, and the yields were pretty good at the end, driven by the final one, the grain size. All we can do with nutrition, as I said at the start, is get that crop to the point where it can utilize it. I like to split the crop into 3 key areas. That foundation stage, so pre-growth stage 30, this is where we focus on establishment, rooting and tillering. Again, the YEM project pretty much points to a bigger biomass, bigger yield. Yes, you've got to keep it standing before anybody says, Phil said, lather loads of nitrogen on, but he forgot to tell me to put chloromacot and modus on. You've got to keep it standing. But that's pretty linear. Your first starting point is drilling the right amount of seed, seedbed conditions, etc. Again, I can't help with that. This is nutrition. That's done. But we need to maximize that biomass above ground, because biomass drives yield. The other thing we then need to do is, if we've got big biomass above ground, we need to support it below ground, like any structure. The biggest structures in the world have strong foundations, and that is the same with a plant. It's called the root system. And the bigger the root system, we generally get high yields. I don't think anybody can argue with that, because high yields can access more nutrient from the soil. Particularly important when we think of, let's not beat about the bush, the price of nitrogen. If people are cutting back from 220 to 180, you need to make that work harder. How do we do that? We have a bigger root system so we can scavenge more from the soil. When it goes dry, how do we access more water? We have a bigger root system. So roots are critical. When it comes to biomass, nitrogen and sulfur are the drivers after you've sorted your seed rate out and your seedbed conditions. And again, I'm hoping most people have got on and got some nitrogen on. I got asked a lot of questions about it. I've never come across anybody who's regretted not putting enough nitrogen on early. Most people regret saying, sorry, I put too much on. Most people regret not putting enough on. So that should be done. The other nutrients to think about at this time, again, manganese, magnesium, it's about chlorophyll. We've got that biomass. Let's keep it green. Let's not lose tillers. But phosphate is particularly important. Nitrogen rates and timings are critical, and so this webinar is not about nitrogen, but I love pictures, and I'll put it up. There's a difference between 40 kilograms a hectare on the left and 80 kilograms a hectare on the right first dose. Whatever I do to that left-hand crop, I cannot make up for the fact that it didn't get the right amount of nitrogen and sulfur on its first pass. So again, build that biomass with that nitrogen and sulfur. Why is it so important? I love Met Office maps. They're brilliant. They're free to access. Go on it and play around with them. Because if you want to look what's dictated yield, things like solar radiation, rainfall, etc., brilliant. And you can see we are getting drier and drier springs. I've had 10 mil at home in February, so maybe this year we'll buck the trend. Let's see. But I haven't even put 2020 on here, where it didn't rain for 3 months. We know it doesn't rain, so get those doses of nitrogen early and get that biomass built. That said, it doesn't have to come out of a bag or a bottle. I don't want to sound like an old boy, but when I was young, everybody used to roll their crops. In 2004, a wonder chemical came out called Atlantis, which meant we could control our blackgrass in April. The biggest problem with it was it did have a tendency to shake the crop up a bit. We all got bigger tractors, we got bigger machinery, so we stopped doing things like rolling in the spring. And for me, rolling in the spring is a great tool when we think about nutrition. It can help a crop tiller. You've got to get on prior to growth stage 30, and I know a lot of people have either been out or thinking of rolling anytime soon, whether it's dry enough now or they're going to do it. The other area it can have an impact with is helping with manganese deficiency. we know manganese deficiency is increased when we've got fluffy seed beds. So yeah, fluffy seed beds. Let's get that land packed back down again with the rolls. So I'm not selling anything. It's actually a pleasant job. So if you're feeling a bit stressed, get out there on the rolls, put the cricket on the radio, and means you'll have to work at night if you want to listen to England because they're in New Zealand. But it's quite a nice job, and it can have a big impact on what we're trying to achieve. Phosphorus, I mentioned, is quite important. There's a massive problem we have with phosphorus is the interactions within the soil do everything in their power to stop it being plant available, whether it's pH that we mentioned at the start. We also know it's very immobile, so it needs to be placed close to the roots, which is why in things like potatoes, maize, now being looked at again in sugar beet, oilseed rape starter fertilizer, it works so well getting that phosphate close to the roots because it is very, very immobile in the soil. The other thing we see, particularly in the spring, is that the availability is severely hampered with soil temperature. When soils are cold, availability is less. We know that. Again, this is information from the M project. So this is winter wheat. This is the top 10 yielding crops versus the bottom 10 yielding crops. And a distinct advantage to having more phosphate available into the plant, particularly in that early spring. And we know with our foliar P products, we can bypass those soil interactions, providing we've got enough foliage, by putting foliar phosphate straight into the leaf and stimulating that plant's growth and rooting. And you can see there just two examples of untreated, and then an application of maize boost to maize roots, where we grow the seed in water. I don't need a graph to show that. Very, very visual. The other thing we know is that rooting can be compromised when we have a wet autumn. If we want a crop to root, starve it of moisture and it will go looking. We've all been around agriculture long enough to know that a wet winter followed by a dry spring is bad news, particularly for things like second wheat and take all. But rooting is generally compromised when we have a wet winter, and we have had a wet autumn, and November in particular was very wet. Again, if you don't believe me, go on the Met Office maps. You've all got your own weather recording, I'm sure. But we know that we can have an impact here. So if we have got a poor rooting crop, then we need to do something about it. Again, when it comes to nutrition, because we can't see it, the best thing to do is get out there with a trowel, with a spade, dig some plants out, have a look at the roots. You can then make an informed decision. A couple of years ago, we started to look at Maize Boost, the product. Don't be confused by the name because it is widely used on other crops. And we started to look at it on winter wheat. So we did some trials in East Yorkshire where we applied the Maize Boost in the spring, in the autumn, sorry, at growth stage 14, followed by the Gramitrel at T1. And we got some big yield increases in these trials. Again, two different trial sites, fully replicated. We don't normally get a ton a hectare, I can assure you, in our foliar nutrient trials. But if you think back to, that was applied in autumn 2020, in spring 2021, April was severely, severely cold. I think we had 28 nights of frost out of the 30. So by having that bigger root system, has that contributed to yield, because the crop could access more nutrients and then more water when it was drier. Practically, I have a bit of a challenge with this, coming from a blackgrass area, because by the time the crop is at growth stage 14, when we're drilling at the end of October, you can't barely walk on the fields, let alone get on with a crop sprayer, and the sole focus is getting that flufenicet on. So we fast forward to a year and we looked at the products at T0. We still had a positive response, but not to the degree of the autumn applications. So what we're doing in our trials program this year is, in the same trial set, we've got autumn and spring applied next to each other, just to see if that benefit is there from that real early applications. The theory says it should be, because the earlier you go, the bigger impact you'll have on rooting. Why Maize Boost? You can see there we've trialed Magphos K alongside it, another one of our YaraVita products. The difference between the two is Maize Boost has zinc in it, and you can see there was a clear advantage from that zinc. So that zinc is clearly having an impact as well. On the basis of that, we are going to change the name of Maize Boost to Crop Boost this year. So because it's used on so many other crops, so you will see that name change coming soon. My advice is, if it stays dry like this and you can travel and you've got a crop that's compromised with rooting, don't wait till T0. Get out there now and give it some Maize Boost and get it kicked on. The earlier, the better, for sure. When we move on to growth stage 31, 32, we're now at the yield building stage. There is nothing we can do about ears. We have got the maximum number of ears we're going to have. We could actually scorch it and not put enough growth reg on and have less ears, but we're not going to increase any ears now. When we get to this timing, it's all about ensuring optimum grain set. So we've got the maximum number of ears we can have. We now need to maximize the number of grains per ear, and this is where the key micronutrients of boron, copper, and zinc come in. They all have a big role to play in fertilization of that ear to ensure we've got optimum grain set. One big sign of copper deficiency in barley is look at it when it's in ear, into the sun, and if you can see blind grain sites, chances are it's copper deficiency. Again, by then it's too late. The other thing we can do with nutrition at this stage is just keeping that crop fed well, so we're building natural defenses. Again, I'll look at the yen data. This is the top 10 versus the bottom 10 yen crops, top 10 in the green, bottom 10 in the dotted line. And you can see they're just two examples of manganese and zinc. What this also tells me is there's no point in having sufficient nutrition at the end here with something like manganese. It's get it on early. You know, again with zinc, early and late. But prevention is better than cure. Proactive nutrition, really, really, really important. And you know, if you are in that yen project, you know, take the learnings from it. You know, it's very, very useful. Combine it with something like grain analysis. You know, I think the whole process of analysis is really worthwhile. Looking back at what we've done, is it working? Because we can see that with nutrient interactions. Just because it's in the soil does not mean it's getting into the plant. And the other one we can see is boron. And you can see there again, it's pretty linear. And you don't need a lot of boron in that wheat plant to manage that deficiency. You know, this is 25,000 samples pushing. Again, manganese, fairly low, but look at zinc, copper, boron. Crops that are suboptimal in nutrition. And I'll say again at the start, you don't need to spend a fortune to correct this. It's in the grand scheme of growing the crops, it's a very, very small percentage. But why are we just putting straight manganese on when we've got all these other nutrient problems? And I'll say it again, you know, leaving a couple of 100 yards in a field and expecting to see it, forget it. If you're going to do it, do half field with and half without and put the whole thing over the weighbridge. And I could bore you to death with countless graphs of trials. Our crop-specific product range of Brachytrel and Gramitrel are growing. They're growing because they are working on farm. And my advice to anybody is, you know, if you don't believe us, then, you know, buy a box, shove it in the middle of a field, have a go with it, see how you get on. You know, we know our products are working, otherwise we wouldn't be increasing the sales with them every year. So we know they work out in the field. But the best place to trial anything, whether it's a new variety, whether it's a piece of machinery, whether it's a YaraVita product, is on your own farm. Don't just take my word for it. I would much sooner you do that. But you can see there we have some issues. Again, Gramitrel, we developed this product looking at those key nutrients for that cereal crop. So the zinc, the manganese, the copper, the magnesium. Again, simple to use, 1 can product. So when we think of that T1 timing, we could have in there 2 fungicides. We could have 2 growth regulators, particularly if you've got a good dose of nitrogen, which you should be doing. I've had it where people are then putting a herbicide in, and then all of a sudden we've got these nutrients to deal with as well. Isn't it so much better having it all in 1 can than having multiple cans? I believe so, and the market believes so. We get told that tank mixability is key. So simple to use, convenient applications. Again, the label on the product label will say up to 3 litres. From all the trial works we've done, that 2 litres a hectare in the spring is the most economic. It's the economical optimum. So again, I don't believe you need 3 litres. 2 litres is where it's at from all the trials that I've seen. When we come towards the end of the programme, this is where we can have an impact on grain quality. And yes, I will say again, the sunshine has the biggest impact. It's not me, it is the sunshine, I can assure you. All we can do with the nutrients is make sure these nutrients aren't lacking. And again, at this point, all these nutrients can have an impact. We've still got a long way to go to harvest from even T3 on a winter wheat crop. So potassium, magnesium and phosphorus, we need some phosphate there to act as an energy transfer, because all we're trying to do is transfer that energy from the flag leaf up to the grain, and phosphate can have a big impact in that. So that needs to be in there as well at that time. Just want to touch briefly on foliar nitrogen products, because they have become a lot more to the fore in the recent times, particularly the last 18 months since a certain fertilizer factory shut. They're nothing new. They've been around for years. They're widely used in crops like maize, potatoes, sugar beet, where we're trying to put a safe form of nitrogen into the crop just to keep that canopy going when physically it's impossible to get through with a crop sprayer with liquid, the scorch risk, or whether it's with a spinning disc spreader. And when I say foliar end products, I'm talking about the methylated ureas. I'm not talking new fol, straight urea. I'm talking the proper foliar end products. They are very crop safe, they are tank mixable, and they can deliver a very, very high nutrient use efficiency. I do believe, however, some of them have been missold in the last few years. They have a place at the end of the program to replace maybe that last 30 to 40 kilos of soil applied. They are very, very efficient when you are hitting leaf. So they need to be applied when you've got sufficient biomass. So if you've got, that basal dressing of 160 to 180 kilos of nitrogen in the soil, for me, then you have a look at these products. When it comes to feed wheats, I think you need to look at the application rates, and a 1 to 5, 5 to 1 replacement is where they should be. So if you're removing 30 kilos from the soil, you need to apply 6 kilos through the leaf. That will be 20 litres of our own product. We know what's happened. People have gone at 10 litres a hectare of ours or competitive products to try and hit a price point, and they've been very, very disappointed. For me, they have a place. They have a place where you want to reduce your overall nitrogen usage. But I'll go back to the basics. If you don't have enough biomass to start with, do not expect these products to work miracles for you, because I don't believe they will. They have a very, very strong place once you've got that biomass. So late on cereals, T2, T3, maize, things like that, really, really useful. Magnesium critical, again, we've spoke about it enough as we've gone through. It's all about chlorophyll production, because ultimately this flag leaf, which on wheat is the one that contributes the most to yield. It's why we've always spent the most on fungicides at that timing. It's why magnesium is key to keep it green, because fundamentally it's one of these things. It's a solar panel. It's nothing more, it's nothing less. And if we have a solar panel, we keep them clean. If we keep them clean, they function. Funny that, the flag leaf is exactly the same. So magnesium is a key nutrient at that point. And we spoke about the interactions of mag in the soil. Potassium is another one we get asked a lot of. For me, again, if you want to grow high yielding white strawed cereals, so you want to be old money, 4 plus 5 tons an acre, 12 tons a hectare, you need to feed it. And you take something like a winter wheat crop, look when the peak demand for potash is, it's here during that grain fill period. So if we're going to apply potassium as a fertilizer, let's get it on here in the spring. Why do we recommend YaraVita compound products in the spring? Because that's when the crop needs it. What we can do then is supplement it with foliar K. And we often see it in trials. These are just some trials I've played around with, nothing scientific. These are split fields on high clay soils with K indexes of 3+, where we've got poultry manures going in. We still get yield responses from applications of potash late through the leaf into the ear. Why? Because it's generally dry then, and again, the plant's got a long way to pull that nutrient up, and it demands it. So something to consider at that timing. So just to summarise on cereals, what our standard recommendation would be on wheat is get out there as soon as you can with that maize boost, with that foliar P product, get that crop stimulated, get some rooting going. You know, and whilst I appreciate everybody wants to tank mix, if you have got the ability and you've got crops now, I would get out there now with it if you've got that time and get that growth stimulating. We can then come back with the Gramitrel at T1. If you do your maize boost early, so you're going out now while the crop's tillering and you've got sufficient foliage, I would then get that Gramitrel on at the T0 time and at growth stage 30. We see again in trials, the earlier the applications of foliar nutrients, the more preventative. That's only if you get that maize boost on first. The one thing I would say is if you take nothing away from tonight, do not mix maize boost and Gramitrel, because our foliar P products with our suspension concentrates do not mix. So don't go and buy Magphos K and try and put Zintrac in it. It will not mix. Use the maize boost. If you're in any doubt, check the website www.tankmix.com. But if you take nothing away from what I've told you, just don't do that, because if you do that, you'll only ever do it once, I can assure you. T2, magnesium. T3, we're starting to look at Magphos K again. When we looked at this work of those key nutrients that we require, potassium, phosphate, magnesium, out the FOSIN archives, I managed to dig out some trials on Magphos K. It was a long time ago. The varieties were things like Malacca, Einstein, Solstice, so it was quite a while ago. But we're popping it back into trials now because it just fits the bill for that final application. And for that boron deficiency on cereals, I would split it out 1/2 litre twice. Because it's quite immobile in the plant, split it out twice. For winter barley, because it's generally drilled earlier than cereals, it should have a better root system. However, again, go and have a look. We only generally go through winter barley twice unless we're splitting our growth reg early. So for me, go with the Gramitrel at that T1 timing, and then your Magphos K at that T2 Orn type timing. For spring barley, again, when it comes to biomass, get 1/2 of your fertilizer in the seed bed. As soon as it's up in rows like that, you want the rest of your fertilizer on because it's got such a short growing period. Get that biomass built. So as soon as you've got 4 true leaf, I'd then get out there with some straight manganese. And for me, the Gramitrel fits in at that T1 timing. When the crop's got to the end of tillering, you're doing your T1. That's when I'd slot a couple of litres a hectare of Gramitrel in. We've got some old trials work, which was split field trials done up in Scotland. And we got some nice yield responses. And then we did some replicated scientific trials in that last 2 years. And again, you know, we've got some nice yield responses. So that was 2021. So we got a nice yield increase over the untreated. So the Mantrac Pro followed by Gramitrel, the Mantrac Pro plus a biostimulant in with this program and the Gramitrel giving a nice yield increase. And the same again last year. And I would say biostimulants, I've not spoke about them tonight, but it is one area where I have seen the benefits on cereal crops is in barley, and it seems to be pretty consistent, both in our trials and also in New Zealand, which the market's not too dissimilar. So we're going to continue looking at that. But there seems to be some interaction, certainly in spring barley, more so than what we're currently seeing in cereals. So to summarise, because I appreciate we're running out of time and I'm sure there'll be some questions. Get the basics right first. Foliars will not make up for errors. I can't give you a silver bullet. And a lot of the basics are down to good farming practice. Then we can proactively manage the crops to optimize yield. Don't wait for deficiency, because if you see deficiency, it's too late and that will just get worse the longer you can't do anything about it. So let's be proactive, and prevention is generally cheaper than cure. Oilseed rape, it's all about that Bracitral Pro. The time is now. We've got active growth. Get out there. 3 litres a hectare applied now at that stem extension type timing. In with your fungicides if you so wish. And then keep that crop green. So things like nitrogen, magnesium, really, really important to keep that crop green and just keep it ticking along. With cereals, again, get out there with that maize boost as soon as you can. In my mind, you know, I get it's an extra pass, but if you want to have that impact and you want to maximize that nitrogen you're going to put on, it's a small price to pay to get out there now and get that crop rooting and stimulate it. Grain number, it's all about the copper, the zinc, etc. Get that Gramitrel on. You can tank mix the Bortrac with it if you so wish at T0, T1. But do not tank mix maize boost and Gramitrel. I'll say it again. And then at the end, improve that grain quality with the likes of magnesium, potassium, phosphate, and Magphos K is our recommendation at that timing. Heather, I'm done.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Phil. An awful lot of detail, data and advice for everybody there. As I anticipated, we've had a lot of questions. I know we're going to run a little bit over time, but let's just try and cover off as many of these as we possibly can. So first off, is it best to tissue test or just go broad spectrum product?
I think it depends on how much time you've got as an individual. If you've got time to tissue test and then select the products accordingly, absolutely fine. You know, that's a very good way of doing it. The broad spectrum products have the benefit in the sense of it's all the nutrients in one can, it's convenient. So for me, I would potentially, I think both have a place. What I would do is I would look at I would look at the crops prior to when you're going to go through with the crop sprayer. Have a look what's going on. Do it on each soil type, whether it's you know, your good fields that you know perform, the bad fields. Have a look at each because that can tell you a lot. And if you've got different soil types on the farm, you don't need to do every field, but it'd be nice to have a look at, well, what are my sandy clay loams doing versus what are my heavy clay loams doing. You know, for me, the broad spectrum products are all about convenience. If somebody says, Phil comes on a stand, says, tell me one thing to do on my winter cereals, go and put 2 litres of Gramitrel on T1 would be my stock advice.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on, a question about water. Is it important to buffer the water to aid nutrient uptake?
No, not from what we've seen. We've done a lot of trials in the glasshouse. So the way we look at products when we develop them, we do safety testing in the glasshouse at Pocklington, but then we also do a lot of uptake testing where we spray the crops, we mark the leaves, and then we look at new leaf and old leaf and the root, and we can see how the products move. And because the leaf surface is slightly acidic, we don't see any need to then buffer further for uptake. We see those products moving into new leaf.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. Next question, what are the optimum N rates for this season?
I would do 2 things. Firstly, I would go on our website and go on Google and Google Yara N calculator. That will take you through to our web page where you can input your nitrogen purchase price. You can input your forward selling price, which I get is going to be a bit of projection. So you can have a look at November futures, whatever you want to do. Put in your application rate you were planning and hit calculate, and that will work out your economical optimum based on the last 15 years of nitrogen dose response trials. So I would go down there. The other thing I would do is if you go on the YouTube channel, there is a previous webinar that was done on nitrogen rates, timings, etc. It's well worth a watch of that, but then say go onto that website because it's looking at the financials, and that's what should be driving it, because that purchase price of nitrogen and your final selling price, which is what will dictate your rates, and it probably won't be 225 kilos a hectare like the book says. It might be only 180, it might be 210, but utilize the tools that are on the website.
Super, thank you very much. Next, what product rates and timings do you suggest for late drilled cereals?
But for late drilled cereals, then again, it's all about the it's all about that routing. So for me, the foliar P products, the likes of the maize boost, if I've got a later drill crop, again, I've seen it, I've done it myself with bits of agronomy I'm involved in. Get out with the rolls, get it tillering, give it a big dose of nitrogen, get it growing, and then get some foliar P on it and push that rooting down, because that rooting is going to be critical.
Okay. Do you recommend any specific strategies for enhanced uptake from soil with second and third weeks?
Rooting again, so I would go down that rooting route. So get that foliar P on to get it rooting. The other thing I would look at, particularly in a second week scenario where take hold could be a risk, is manganese. Make sure the crop isn't short of manganese, because increased manganese deficiency can also have an adverse effect on take hold. So ensuring that crop's sufficient manganese. So again, get out there with the rolls, do the basic stuff, and then put the foliars on top. So rooting, phosphate, and manganese on second weeks.
Brilliant. Sulfur now. My grain analysis shows below critical for sulfur. What do you recommend?
I don't believe you can rectify sulfur deficiency through the leaf. So if plenty of people I know have gone out and bought straight nitrogen products and they forgot about sulfur, if you want to improve nitrogen use efficiency, sulfur and nitrogen go hand in hand. So my first point of call would be, am I using a straight nitrogen product or a nitrogen sulfur product? If I'm using straight nitrogen, then you go out and start using a nitrogen sulfur product. If you're already using a nitrogen sulfur product, then look at your rates and timings of sulfur, because if you're not putting enough on, you need to increase the rate. However, it could be that you're putting all your sulfur on early, which is not what the crop demands. If you think back to the cow, if I'm a livestock farmer and today's Monday, I don't put all my meal in the trough on Monday morning and expect the cow to regulate how much it eats over the course of the week. I shouldn't be doing that with a cereal plant either. So I shouldn't be lumping all my sulfur on in one hit. You're then totally decoupling your sulfur management. So, for me, I think it's a fundamental thing. There isn't a straight answer, because without knowing what your sulfur strategy is, but have a chat with any of the agronomy team from Yara, whether it's Mark, Nat, myself, or local area managers. But I think a review of the sulfur strategy again is worthwhile. And then what I would do is follow it with grain testing again, because grain testing is the best way of determining sulfur deficiency and whether your sulfur strategy is working. But we know a lot of people let's not beat about the bush. We know a lot of people have bought straight nitrogen, and I think it's gonna hit people when they realize they've got sulfur deficiency. So for me, have a review, and when it comes to purchasing for next season, I get the last 18 months has been an absolute pain when it comes to fertilizer, and it's been a challenge, and people have bought what they could get hold of because supply chains were a challenge, and we all know it. We all know the reasons why. But as we get back to normality, make sure if you're buying for next year, you're having those conversations about sulfur. So if you're going out and buying straight granular urea, should you be looking at something like our Amidas product, which has got the sulfur in it? I firmly believe you should, and that's not just because I work for Yara, because we know people are going to have a problem. So don't forget that sulfur when you're having the conversations, when you're buying, because people are buying for next harvest already. So don't forget it with the fert.
Okay, I think we've got time for just a couple more. With regard to foliar end products, what is the best growth stage for protein applications, especially in a dry year?
As I covered in the thing, I think at the end of the season, I think T2 and T3, I think they all behave differently. I think some of them have a quicker release, some don't. Some of the competitive products, they need to be on early. Again, from what I've seen in our trials, it's quite a challenge to consistently hit protein with those true foliar end products. You can do it, but you need to up them rates. You know, people putting 10 litres, 20 litres a hectare on is not going to wash. Where I've seen people achieve proteins with them, they're putting 20 to 30 litres on per pass. So you need to look at them in a very different way, because putting 10 to 20 litres on because that's the price point you want to work to will not work. I think you need to be higher. So I think, you know, you need to be looking at 20 litres at T2, 20 litres at T3 and review it. Being brutally honest, through all our trials, I think the still most consistent way is the foliar products at Milky Ripe. Yes, it's an extra pass. Logistically, it's a challenge. The second best is that AN pre-arraign at growth stage 39. But yes, I get it again. It's got a rain. But you know, with a true foliar nitrogen products, you need to up them rates, and they need a different mindset. You can't look at it on a cost per hectare basis versus 30 kilos of nitrogen, because all you'll do is go and buy 30 kilos of nitrogen. Because I would, that's human nature.
Okay, thank you. You've spoken widely about oilseed, wheat and barley, but what product do you suggest for beans?
For beans, then we have a crop specific for beans called Foliar Pro, which is a nitrogen-free product. So it's got in all the boron, the manganese, the magnesium, the molybdenum, the sulfur, which we know beans responds to. It's a powder, so some people don't like powders, but 2.5 to 3 kilos a hectare of that applied in with your first flowering spray on winter or spring beans would be my go-to product. Because it's got no, we know Brassitrol Pro is also used. However, it's got a sniff of nitrogen in, so you need a FACS qualified advisor to write the recommendation out. But Foliar Pro is a product that we've got specific for that non-nitrogen winter bean crop, and having that sulfur in, we feel is a benefit.
Okay, thank you. Final question, I think then. What product would you recommend for late application to maize?
So for late applications of maize, I'd probably go with a safe N. Early on in the maize crop, get that placement fertilizer, and then get the maize boost on the foliar phosphate around that 4 to 6, 8 true leaves. If you're going late as you can with the crop sprayer, that's where these methylated urea foliar nitrogen products work really, really well. You get as late through as you can, and they feed throughout the growing period. We will cover maize when we do our next webinar, which might not be till April. We haven't agreed the date yet, but we'll cover maize, sugar beet, and potatoes when we do that.
Okay, fantastic. I think, looking at the clock, we better leave it there, but thank you very much indeed to everybody who has submitted questions. Apologies if we've not been able to answer yours on this occasion. Just a couple of things for me to point out before we say goodbye. So basis points are available from this webinar. You can see the code there. And also, just to let you know, for those of you local to Lincolnshire, we're hosting a field event on the 8th of March in conjunction with our friends from Limagrain. If you'd like to come along and join us, please scan the QR code there. That will take you straight through to the registration page. Or alternatively, excuse me, check the Yara UK social channels for further details. It's going to be a good day. Lots more information to share with you all, and also there will be food. So yeah, if that doesn't sell it, I don't know what will. If you need a recap of anything that's been covered today, this webinar will be available to watch on demand from the Yara UK YouTube channel. It'll be up there, loaded up in a couple of days. So yeah, you can watch it again at your leisure. So all that remains for me to say is thank you all very much indeed for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Phil, for all the detail and advice that you have shared with us. And I look forward to seeing you all again at our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good evening.